Imagine for a moment that you are standing in a crowded subway station or a busy coffee shop. You look around at the dozens of people passing by, each lost in their own world. To the untrained eye, this is a sea of random movements, chance encounters, and unpredictable choices. But what if I told you that almost every interaction, you see the way a stranger avoids eye contact, the specific way a barista handles a difficult customer, or even why you chose the specific seat you're sitting in is governed by a set of invisible, ancient laws. We take great pride in our free will. We like to believe that we are the captains of our souls, making logical, calculated decisions every hour of the day. But the truth is far more humbling. Most of the time, we are not the pilot. We are the passenger in a vehicle driven by biological imperatives and psychological hardwiring that was finalized thousands of years before the first city was ever built. In this journey through Master, the psychology of human behavior, we are going to peel back the curtain on this hidden machinery. We aren't just looking for hacks or tricks to get what we want. That is a shallow way to live. Instead, we are seeking a deeper, more empathetic understanding of the human condition. Why do we push people away when we need them most? Why does a certain tone of voice make us defensive? And how can we, by understanding these patterns, become more influential, more connected, and more effective in every area of our lives? As we navigate this breakdown, we will anchor our exploration in 4 core themes: the evolutionary echo, understanding how our Stone Age brains struggle to cope with a digital, hyper-connected world; the power of perception, learning that we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are; the language of needs, shifting from what can I get to what does this person truly lack; the ethics of influence, drawing a firm line between manipulation, which seeks to diminish others, and influence, which seeks to elevate everyone involved. By the time we reach the end of this story, you won't just see behavior differently, you will see yourself differently. You'll realize that influence isn't something you do to people. It is a byproduct of how clearly you understand them. Let's begin our first step into the biological blueprint of the mind. Chapter 1. The biological blueprint. Why we do what we do. If you have ever snapped at a loved one for no real reason, or felt your heart race before a simple presentation, you have experienced a hostile takeover by a version of yourself that is roughly 200,000 years old. To understand human behavior, we must first accept the startling truth. We are walking around with high-speed modern desires, but our brains are operating on legacy software designed for a world that no longer exists. We often treat our minds like a single, unified CPU, but it is more like a house that has been renovated over and over again, with the old plumbing still hidden behind the new drywall. The 3-story house of the brain. Think of your brain as a 3-story building. On the ground floor, you have the lizard brain, the brainstem. This floor is purely concerned with survival. It doesn't think, it reacts. It manages your breathing, your heart rate, and your immediate fight or flight response. If a car swerves toward you on the highway, the ground floor takes over before you even realize you're in danger. On the 2nd floor, we find the mammalian brain, the limbic system. This is the seat of our emotions, our memories, and our social standing. This floor is obsessed with the tribe. It asks, am I safe? Am I liked? Where do I fit in the hierarchy? This is where the mastery of behavior truly begins, because humans are, at their core, emotional creatures who occasionally think, not thinking creatures who occasionally feel. Finally, on the 3rd floor, we have the human brain, the prefrontal cortex. This is the penthouse. It's where we do math, plan for the future, and practice philosophy. It is brilliant, but it is also incredibly energy-hungry and slow. The tragedy of the modern human condition is that when the ground floor or the 2nd floor feels threatened, they can cut the power to the penthouse. This is why, in a moment of heated anger, you lose your ability to speak eloquently. Your human brain has been evicted by your lizard brain, the ghost of the savannah. Why does this matter for influence? Because every person you meet is subconsciously scanning their environment for threats or rewards. Based on ancient criteria, in our ancestral past, being cast out of the tribe was a death sentence. You couldn't hunt a woolly mammoth alone, and you certainly couldn't defend yourself against a predator while you slept. Consequently, Our brains developed an extreme sensitivity to social rejection. This is why public speaking consistently ranks higher on fear scales than death itself. To your ancient brain, standing alone in front of a group of staring eyes feels exactly like being surrounded by a pack of wolves. When you understand this, you realize that most difficult behaviors, stubbornness, arrogance, or coldness are actually sophisticated defense mechanisms. When someone is being stubborn in a meeting, they aren't necessarily bad. Their second floor feels that their status or significance is under attack. They are literally fighting for their survival in a psychological sense. The dopamine loop and the seeking system. The book teaches us that human behavior is largely a search for homeostasis, a state of balance. But we are also driven by a chemical called dopamine. Many people think dopamine is about pleasure, but it's actually about anticipation. It is the seeking chemical. Our ancestors survived because dopamine pushed them to look over the next hill for berries or water. Today, that same drive makes us scroll through social media or check our emails 50 times a day. We are novelty seekers by biological design. If you want to influence someone, you cannot be boring. You must trigger their seeking system. You do this by introducing curiosity, by telling half-finished stories, or by presenting a vision of a future that feels like a reward worth chasing. The power of the amygdala hijack. One of the most vital concepts in behavioral psychology is the amygdala hijack. The amygdala is the tiny, almond-shaped alarm system in your second floor. Its job is to spot danger. The problem is that the amygdala cannot tell the difference between a physical threat, a lion, and a social threat, a snarky comment from your boss. When the amygdala fires, it floods your body with cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart rate increases, your vision narrows, and most importantly, your empathy evaporates. You cannot influence someone who is in the middle of a hijack. If you try to use logic on someone who is terrified or enraged, you are talking to the penthouse when everyone has already evacuated to the basement. The master of behavior knows how to lower the temperature. They use a calm tone, open body language, and validation to tell the other person's amygdala, you are safe. There is no lion here. Only then can the human brain come back online to listen to your proposal. The mirror neuron system. Finally, we must look at mirror neurons. These are special cells in the brain that fire both when we perform an action and when we watch someone else perform that same action. This is the biological basis for empathy. It is why you wince when you see someone else get hurt, or why you feel a lump in your throat during a sad movie. In terms of influence, this means that your internal state is contagious. If you approach a negotiation feeling nervous and defensive, the other person's mirror neurons will pick up on that, and they will start to feel nervous and defensive too. This is why the first person you must influence in any interaction is yourself. You must cultivate the internal state you want the other person to mirror. Psychological reflection. We often think of our biology as a cage, but it is actually a map. When you realize that human behavior is driven by these deep, subterranean currents of survival and tribal belonging, you stop taking things personally. When someone is rude to you, you don't see a jerk. You see a brain that feels threatened. When you feel a surge of anxiety, you don't see weakness. You see a ground floor alarm system doing its job, even if it's a bit oversensitive. Mastery begins the moment you stop fighting your biology and start working with it. We are emotional creatures who use logic to justify decisions that our ancient, survival-focused brains have already made. To influence the mind, you must first soothe the biology. Chapter 2. The Architecture of Belief. How the Mind Maps Reality. If you have ever argued with someone about politics, religion, or even something as simple as the best way to load a dishwasher, you've realized that two people can look at the exact same set of facts and see two completely different worlds. We like to think of our eyes as cameras and our ears as microphones, recording an objective reality. But in truth, the human mind is not a recording device. It is a storyteller. Every piece of information that enters your brain is filtered, distorted, and categorized long before it reaches your conscious awareness. This architecture of belief is the software that interprets the biological signals we discussed in the previous chapter. To master human behavior, you must understand that you are never interacting with reality. You are interacting with someone's map of reality. And as the famous saying goes, the map is not the territory, the prism of perception. Why we see what we want to see. Our brains are bombarded with roughly 11 million bits of information every second. However, our conscious mind can only process about 40 to 50 bits per second. This means that your brain is a world-class editor. It is constantly deleting, generalizing, and distorting data to keep you from being overwhelmed. This editing process is guided by your mental schemas. A schema is a cognitive framework or concept that helps organize and interpret information. Think of it as a pair of tinted glasses. If your glasses are tinted blue, everything looks blue. If you have a schema that says the world is a dangerous place, your brain will prioritize information that confirms that danger, that scowl on a stranger's face, and delete information that contradicts it. The 5 other people who smiled at you. In the context of influence, this means that facts are often useless. If a person's schema is successful, people are all greedy. Showing them a story about a generous billionaire won't necessarily change their mind. Their brain will likely distort the information, telling them, he's only doing that for a tax break. To influence someone, you cannot simply throw new facts at them. You have to understand the color of their glasses. The confirmation bias, the brain's favorite trap. The most powerful architect in our mental building is the confirmation bias. This is our innate tendency to seek out, interpret, and remember information that confirms our existing beliefs while ignoring or undervaluing evidence that contradicts them. This isn't just a flaw in our thinking. It's a survival mechanism. Changing a belief is metabolically expensive. It requires the brain to rewire neural pathways, which takes energy. It is much cheaper, energy-wise, to simply ignore the new information and stick to the old story. When you are trying to persuade someone, you are often asking them to undergo a neural renovation. This is why direct confrontation rarely works. When you tell someone you're wrong, their brain perceives it as a threat. The ego steps in to protect the belief system, and the person becomes even more entrenched in their original position. This is known as the backfire effect. The story of the internal narrative. Every human being is the hero of their own movie. We all have an internal narrative that explains who we are, why we do what we do, and why we are right. This narrative is the glue that holds our identity together. If you want to influence someone instantly, you must find a way to make your request fit inside their existing story. If you want a lazy employee to work harder, don't tell them they are lazy. That attacks their hero narrative. Instead, find a part of their story they are proud of. Perhaps they see themselves as a person who provides for their family and frame the work as a way to further that specific goal. You aren't changing the person. You are changing the frame of the situation so that it aligns with their internal map. Cognitive dissonance, the engine of change. While the brain loves consistency, it absolutely hates cognitive dissonance. This is the mental discomfort we feel when we hold to conflicting beliefs, or when our behavior doesn't match our values. Imagine someone who considers themselves a healthy person, but finds themselves eating a box of donuts. The tension between the belief I am healthy and the action I am eating junk creates a psychological itch that must be scratched. They will either change the behavior, stop eating, or, more likely, change the belief. One donut doesn't count if I go to the gym later. Mastery of behavior involves knowing how to gently introduce a small amount of dissonance. By asking questions that highlight a gap between who a person thinks they are and what they are currently doing, you create a vacuum that the other person will feel compelled to fill. The power of priming and expectancy. Our maps of reality are also highly suggestible. Priming is a phenomenon where exposure to one stimulus influences a response to a subsequent stimulus without conscious guidance. In a famous study, researchers found that if people held a warm cup of coffee for a few minutes, they were more likely to judge a stranger as having a warm personality. If they held iced coffee, they judged the same stranger as cold. Our physical environment and the words we use prime the brain to look for certain patterns. This is why setting the stage is so important. If you start a meeting by talking about challenges and obstacles, you have primed everyone's brain to look for problems. If you start by talking about opportunities and previous wins, You have primed them to look for solutions. You have literally adjusted the filters on their architecture of belief before the real work even begins. Psychological reflection. The humility of the map. Understanding the architecture of belief leads to a profound sense of psychological humility. You realize that your truth is just your map. When someone disagrees with you, they aren't necessarily being difficult or stupid. They are simply navigating a different map, built from different experiences, different traumas, and different cultural filters. The master of influence stops trying to be right and starts trying to be effective. Being effective requires you to temporarily step out of your map and walk around in theirs. You ask yourself, what must be true for this person's behavior to make sense to them? When you find the answer to that question, you have found the key to the room. You no longer need to kick the door down. You can simply turn the handle. Key takeaway: people do not react to reality. They react to their internal map of reality. To change a behavior, you must first understand the beliefs that make that behavior feel logical to the person performing it. Once we understand how people map their world internally, we must look at how they signal those maps to the outside world. Often, the most important things are said without a single word being spoken. This leads us to the silent world of nonverbal mastery. Chapter 3. The Silent Language, Nonverbal Mastery. Have you ever walked into a room and felt an immediate sense of tension, even though no one was speaking? Or perhaps you've met someone who said all the right things, yet every fiber of your being told you not to trust them. This is because human beings are biologically programmed to prioritize the music of communication over the lyrics. Long before our ancestors developed complex syntax or grammar, they communicated through posture, scent, eye contact, and vocal tonality. In the modern world, we focus intensely on our words, our scripts, while often remaining completely oblivious to the silent broadcast our bodies are sending out 24/7. To master the psychology of behavior, you must learn to read this broadcast in others and, more importantly, to consciously direct your own. The hierarchy of communication. In the 1960s, researcher Albert Mehrabian famously suggested that when there is an inconsistency between words and body language, we trust the nonverbal cues almost exclusively, while the exact 7% to 38% to 55% rule is often debated in academic circles. The core principle remains undisputed. If your mouth says "I'm confident," but your shoulders are hunched and your voice is thin, the world will believe your shoulders. Nonverbal communication is the language of the mammalian brain. While the human brain, the penthouse, handles the words, the limbic system, the second floor, handles the vibes. Because the limbic system is much faster than the prefrontal cortex, we often form an impression of someone within the first 1/10 of a second. This is the thin slicing phenomenon. Our brains take a tiny slice of data and extrapolate an entire personality from it. The science of presence, pacing, and leading. One of the most profound tools in the master's toolkit is pacing and leading. Think of this as a psychological dance. When two people are in deep rapport, they naturally begin to mirror each other. They lean in at the same time. They adopt similar leg crossing patterns. They even match their breathing rates. Most people wait for rapport to happen by accident. The master creates it by design. By subtly and, I must emphasize, subtly matching the other person's posture, energy level, and speech rate pacing. You send a powerful signal to their limbic system that says, "I am like you. I am safe." Once that bridge is built, you can slowly change your own behavior, perhaps by slowing down your speech or relaxing your shoulders. The other person will often unconsciously follow your lead. Leading. The truth about eye contact. We are told that eye contact is the key to confidence, but the psychology is more nuanced. Eye contact is a dosage game. Too little, and you appear untrustworthy or submissive. Too much, and you appear aggressive or predatory. The master uses soft focus. Instead of staring intensely into someone's pupils, they look at the general area of the face, occasionally breaking contact to look away thoughtfully before returning. This mimics the natural eye patterns of someone who is genuinely interested in processing information, rather than someone who is trying to dominate or win the interaction. Micro-expressions. The leakage of the soul. While we can control our macro expressions, the big smiles, the obvious frowns, we struggle to control micro expressions. These are involuntary facial movements that last only a fraction of a second, a fleeting sneer of contempt, a momentary flash of fear, or a twitch of genuine joy. These micro expressions are leaks from the subconscious. If you want to influence someone, you must become a student of these leaks. If you propose a deal and see a micro expression of disgust, the crinkling of the nose, even if they say that sounds interesting, you know you have hit a nerve. Instead of pushing forward, you should pivot. I sense there might be a part of this proposal that doesn't quite sit right with you. Let's explore that. This level of perception makes the other person feel seen on a level they've likely never experienced, creating an unbreakable bond of trust. The power of vocal tonality. Your voice is a musical instrument, and most people are playing only one note. To influence behavior, you must master 3 primary tonal archetypes. The authority tone. This is a downward inflection at the end of sentences. It sounds like a command. It is used when you need to be seen as the expert. The collaborative tone. This is a flat inflection. It sounds like a peer-to-peer exchange. It is the tone of, let's figure this out together. The curious tone. This is an upward inflection, but avoid uptalk, which sounds like a question. It sounds like an invitation. It signals that you are open to their perspective. If you use the authority tone when someone is feeling vulnerable, you will trigger their defense mechanisms. If you use the curious tone when you need to give a direct order, you will lose your status. The master matches the tone to the psychological need of the moment, proxemics, and the architecture of space. Influence is often won or lost by how we navigate these boundaries. If you invade someone's personal zone too early, you trigger an amygdala response. The lizard brain screams danger. However, if you remain in the social zone for too long, you can never build deep rapport. The master moves between these zones like a tide, stepping in to share a confidential insight, then stepping back to give the other person room to breathe. Emotional contagion. You are a radio tower. Finally, we must understand emotional contagion because of the mirror neurons we discussed in Chapter 1. Your internal state is constantly infecting those around you. If you walk into a negotiation feeling, I need this deal, your body will broadcast neediness, which smells like low status and weakness. The other person will mirror that tension. But if you walk in with abundance, the internal feeling that you are okay, regardless of the outcome, your body will broadcast calm certainty. This is the ultimate nonverbal hack. The person with the most stable emotional state will always influence the emotional state of the other. You don't act confident. You cultivate a state of such inner stability that the other person's brain automatically adopts your calmness as its own. Psychological reflection. Listening with your eyes. Mastering nonverbal communication is not about becoming a human lie detector or a manipulative mime. It is about developing a higher level of social sensitivity. It is about realizing that most people are screaming for connection, validation, or safety, but they lack the words to say it. When you learn to read the silent language, you stop listening to what people say and start listening to what they mean. You become a safe harbor in a world of loud, clashing signals. People will be drawn to you, not because of your clever arguments, but because your presence makes them feel understood without a word being spoken. Your body speaks much louder than your voice. To influence others, you must first master your own internal state, ensuring your nonverbal signals align with your conscious intentions. Chapter 4. The Hook. Understanding human motivation and needs. If you want to move a mountain, you need a lever. If you want to move a human being, you need to understand their hook. Most of our attempts at influence fail because we try to motivate people using our values, our reasons, and our goals. We stand on our side of the river, shouting across at them to come over because the view is great. But humans are not moved by logic. They are moved by the fulfillment of deep-seated, often unconscious, psychological needs. To influence anyone instantly, you must stop looking at what they are doing and start looking at what they are hungry for. The hierarchy of hunger. Beyond Maslow, we've all seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the pyramid that starts with food and shelter and ends with self-actualization. But in the psychology of daily influence, The hooks are often more immediate and visceral. Tony Robbins often speaks of the 6 human needs, and this book expands on that by identifying the specific drivers that act as the steering wheel for human behavior. Every person you meet is currently starving in one of these categories. If you can provide the food they need, you don't just influence them. You become a vital part of their world. 1. The need for certainty, safety, and predictability. At our core, we are survival machines. Uncertainty feels like a threat to the lizard brain we discussed in Chapter 1. If someone feels that their job, their status, or their routine is at risk, they will lock down. They become rigid, defensive, and resistant to new ideas. The influence hook. To move someone driven by certainty, you must provide a bridge of logic. You don't pitch a revolution. You pitch an evolution. You show them how your idea is actually a safer, more predictable version of what they are already doing. 2. The need for significance. The ego's oxygen. This is perhaps the most powerful hook in the modern world. Every human being has a deep-seated desire to feel unique, important, and needed. When someone's need for significance is high, they will do almost anything to be seen. This is the driver behind the high-powered executive, the attention-seeking social media influencer, and even the difficult person who argues just to prove they are right. The influence hook. Validation. Not empty flattery, but genuine recognition of their unique contribution. If you can make someone feel important in your presence, their defensive walls will crumble. As Dale Carnegie famously said, the deepest principle in human nature is the craving to be appreciated. 3. The need for connection and love. While significance is about being separate and better, connection is about being part of. Many people are driven by the fear of being alone or misunderstood. They will agree with the group even if the group is wrong, simply to maintain the bond. The influence hook. Empathy and vulnerability. By showing that you understand their struggle or by sharing a small struggle of your own, you create a we space. Influence here isn't about the deal. It's about the relationship. 4. The need for variety, uncertainty, and surprise. Ironically, while we need certainty to survive, we need variety to feel alive. A life that is 100% predictable is a prison. This is why people gamble, travel, or suddenly quit stable jobs. They are starving for new stimuli. The influence hook. Curiosity and novelty. If you want to influence a variety-driven person, you must frame your proposal as an adventure or a new frontier. You have to trigger the dopamine-seeking system we discussed earlier. 5. The need for growth and contribution. These are the higher-level needs. When someone has enough certainty and significance, they begin to look for meaning. They want to become more than they are and give back to something larger than themselves. The influence hook. Purpose. Frame your request in terms of the legacy it will leave or the person they will become by doing it. The book introduces a powerful mental model. Every person is constantly listening to a radio station called WIIFM. What's in it for me? This sounds cynical, but it's actually biological. Our brains are designed to filter for personal relevance. When you speak to someone, their brain is subconsciously asking, is this person a threat? Is this person a reward? Or is this person irrelevant? If you spend 10 minutes talking about your company's history, you are irrelevant. If you spend 10 minutes talking about how your product will solve their specific headache, you are a reward. To master behavior, you must become a value detective. Before you open your mouth, you must ask, which of the 6 needs is this person currently trying to satisfy? The theory of psychological air. Imagine you are in a room and the oxygen is suddenly sucked out. You wouldn't care about the furniture, the conversation, or your bank account. You would care about only one thing: air. In human interaction, empathic listening is psychological air. When you listen to someone not to reply, but to truly understand, you are giving them air. Most people are suffocating because no one really hears them. They are so busy trying to get their own air significance, certainty, that they can't listen to you. The moment you provide that air, by validating their feelings and needs, their survival mode switches off. Only then can they breathe. And only once they can breathe can they consider your perspective, the hidden driver, the pain-pleasure principle. At the most basic level, All human motivation can be distilled into two forces: the desire to avoid pain and the desire to gain pleasure. However, the brain is loss-averse. Research shows that we are twice as motivated to avoid losing $100 as we are to gain $100. In terms of influence, this means that fear of loss is a stronger hook than promise of gain. If you tell a client, "You will save $10,000 by doing this," they might be interested. If you tell them, "You are currently losing $10,000 every month by not doing this," they will be electrified. One approach is a suggestion. The other is a rescue mission. The power of because. A fascinating study by Ellen Langer at Harvard found that the mere word because can act as a psychological hook, even if the reason that follows is nonsensical. In the study, a researcher tried to cut in line at a photocopier. Scenario A: "Excuse me, may I use the Xerox machine?" 60% success. Scenario B: "Excuse me, may I use the Xerox machine because I'm in a rush?" 94% success. Scenario C: "Excuse me, may I use the Xerox machine because I have to make copies?" 93% success. The because triggered a click-word response, a programmed behavioral pattern. The brain hears because and assumes there is a valid reason, so it stops processing and simply complies. This shows that humans crave justification. We need to feel that our actions are logical, even when they aren't. Psychological reflection, the gift of recognition. Understanding motivation is the difference between pushing and pulling. When you push, you meet resistance. When you pull, by identifying a person's needs and aligning your request with those needs, you move together. The most influential people in history weren't those with the best arguments. They were those who made people feel that by following the leader, they were actually following their own highest interests. Mastery is not about forcing your will onto others. It is about discovering their will and showing them how your path helps them achieve it. When you see a lazy person, realize they aren't lazy, they just haven't found a hook that matters to them. When you see an angry person, realize they are just trying to reclaim their significance. When you change how you look at people, the people you look at change. You cannot motivate anyone. You can only discover what already motivates them and align your goals with their needs. Influence is the art of showing someone that what you want is exactly what they've been looking for. Once we understand the hooks that drive people, we need a way to connect those hooks to our own. We need to build a bridge of trust that allows us to walk into their world and invite them into ours. This brings us to the most practical skill of all, the art of rapport. Chapter 5, The Art of Rapport, Building Instant Bridges. If you have ever been in a conversation where the minutes felt like seconds, where you felt completely in sync with another human being, you have experienced the power of rapport. In the world of psychology, rapport is often described as the grease on the wheels of human interaction. Without it, every request feels like a demand, and every suggestion feels like an intrusion. With it, two strangers can become allies in a matter of moments. The mistake most people make is believing that rapport is a mystical spark that either exists or doesn't. They wait for chemistry to happen by accident. But the master of behavior understands that rapport is a deliberate psychological state that can be constructed, brick by following the fundamental laws of human connection. The law of similarity, the "I am like you" signal. At the deepest level of our limbic system, we are wired to be suspicious of the other. In our ancestral past, anyone who didn't look, act, or speak like our tribe was a potential threat. Conversely, we feel an instinctive sense of safety and comfort around people who are like us. Rapport is the process of signaling "I am like you" to another person's subconscious. This is not about being a chameleon in a deceptive way. It is about finding the common frequencies and tuning your radio to match theirs. When you match someone's energy, you aren't just being polite, you are lowering their biological defense mechanisms. Mirroring and matching, the dance of the subconscious. In Chapter 3, we touched on the silent language, but here we look at how to use it to build a bridge. True mirroring is a subtle art. If someone crosses their legs and you immediately cross yours, it looks like a mockery. This is not rapport, it's mime. Real rapport building uses matching and cross-matching. Matching, if they speak slowly, you slow down your tempo. If they use visual language, I see what you mean. You use visual language that looks clear to me. Cross-matching. This is a higher level skill. If someone is tapping their pen nervously, you might subtly tap your foot at the same rhythm. Your brain and theirs begin to sync up through a process called When you are in deep rapport, a fascinating thing happens. The leader and follower roles become fluid. You can test this by making a small, deliberate movement, like taking a sip of water or adjusting your glasses. If the other person mirrors you within a few seconds, you have locked in. You are now leading the interaction. Active, empathetic listening. The rare gift of presence. In a world where everyone is waiting for their turn to speak, the person who truly listens is a magician. But there is a massive difference between hearing and active, empathetic listening. Most people listen through the filter of their own architecture of belief. They are busy judging, categorized, and preparing their rebuttal. Active, empathetic listening requires you to set your own map aside and try to view the world through theirs. The technique for this is backtracking. Instead of saying, "I understand," which is a conversation stopper, you use their specific key words. If someone says, "I've been feeling really overwhelmed with the relentless pace of this project," you don't say, "I get that it's busy." You say, "It sounds like the relentless pace is leaving you feeling overwhelmed." By using their exact words, you signal to their brain that you haven't just heard the sounds they made, you have visited the place they are speaking from. This creates a powerful we space. The vulnerability loop. We often think that to influence others, we must appear perfect, strong, and invulnerable. The psychology of rapport tells us the exact opposite. Perfect people are intimidating. They aren't relatable. Rapport is often catalyzed by what researchers call a vulnerability loop. It works like this. Person A sends a signal of vulnerability, admitting a mistake, sharing a doubt. Person B detects this signal and responds with their own signal of vulnerability. A loop is established that signals we are safe to be ourselves here. If you want to build rapport instantly, don't lead with your resume. Lead with a human moment. By being the first to drop your shield, you give the other person permission to drop theirs. This is the foundation of the Ben Franklin effect, the psychological phenomenon where we actually like people more after we have done them a small favor. Because our brain rationalizes that we must like them if we help them. Finding the common enemy or common goal. Nothing builds a bridge faster than a shared direction. Psychologically, human beings are tribal creatures. We define ourselves by what we are for and what we are against. If you can find a common enemy, whether it's a confusing bureaucracy, a mutual competitor, or even a shared frustration with the weather, you instantly move from across the table to same side of the table. You are no longer two individuals negotiating. You are a team facing a problem. This is why the best negotiators always start with the problem, rather than the proposal. By aligning against the problem, the rapport is built on the shared struggle toward a solution, the power of the name and the context. Dale Carnegie famously noted that a person's name is, to that person, the sweetest and most important sound in any language. But it goes deeper than just the name. It's about contextual validation. When you remember a small detail about someone's life, their child's name, their recent trip, their specific coffee preference, you are signaling that they exist as a unique individual in your map of the world. In the age of digital noise and faceless transactions, this personal touch is a superpower. It proves that you are paying attention, and attention is the purest form of generosity. Psychological reflection, the soul of rapport. Ultimately, the art of rapport is not a trick to get people to like you. It is the practice of unconditional positive regard. It is the decision to assume, before the conversation even begins, that the person in front of you is interesting, valuable, and has something to teach you. If you use rapport techniques while feeling contempt for the other person, they will feel it. Their limbic system will detect the micro-expressions of your true feelings. And the techniques will backfire, making you look manipulative. True rapport is an inside-out job. You cultivate a genuine curiosity about the other person, and the mirroring and backtracking become natural expressions of that curiosity. You are building a bridge, not to invade their territory, but to visit it. Key takeaway. Rapport is the process of becoming psychologically invisible so that the other person feels safe enough to show you their true map of the world. You build this bridge by matching their frequency and validating their reality. Once the bridge of rapport is built, and the other person feels safe and understood, you can begin to guide the interaction. This is where we move from connection to influence. In the next chapter, we explore the shortcuts the brain takes when making decisions, the levers that move the mind. Chapter 6. Cognitive Shortcuts, the Levers of Influence. In an ideal world, we would make every decision like a grandmaster playing chess, analyzing every move, calculating every outcome, and weighing every piece of evidence with cold, hard logic. But the reality is that the world is too complex for that. If we had to think deeply about every brand of toothpaste, every email subject line, or every social invitation, our brains would burn through their entire daily energy supply by breakfast. To survive, the human brain has developed heuristics, mental shortcuts that allow us to make lightning-fast decisions based on minimal information. These shortcuts are the buttons of human psychology. If you know where they are, you can press them to guide behavior. But beware, these are the same levers used by master marketers and con artists alike. Our goal is to use them ethically, as navigation aids to help people reach the right decision faster. The click-word response. The book refers to these shortcuts as click-word responses. Click a specific stimulus happens in the environment, where a standard, pre-programmed behavior rolls out. It is an automatic, almost mechanical reaction. Think of a mother turkey. She is a dedicated parent, but her mothering behavior is triggered almost entirely by one specific sound, the cheep cheep of her chicks. If a chick makes that sound, the mother cares for it. If it doesn't, she ignores it or even kills it. In one famous experiment, a stuffed polecat, a natural enemy of the turkey, was fitted with a small recorder playing the cheep cheep sound. The mother turkey didn't just tolerate the polecat, she tucked it under her wing. Humans have their own versions of the cheep cheep sound. Let's look at the most powerful ones. 1. The rule of reciprocity, the social debt. This is the give and take that holds society together. We have an almost visceral discomfort with being in someone's debt. If someone does us a favor, buys us a coffee, or gives us a small gift, a psychological debt is recorded in our mental ledger. We feel a heavy pressure to pay it back to cancel the debt. The key to using reciprocity in influence is to be the first to give. But the gift must be 3 things: significant, unexpected, and personalized. Asterisk, if you give a client a generic calendar, that's a marketing expense. If you give them a book on a specific hobby they mentioned in passing, that's a gift. The word response to a genuine gift is an open door for your next request. 2. The power of scarcity, the fear of missing out. Our brains are wired to equate availability with value. If something is abundant, we assume it's average. If it's rare, we assume it's precious. This is why limited time offers and only 2 left in stock are so effective. But true scarcity isn't just about numbers. It's about loss aversion. We discussed in Chapter 4 that the pain of loss is twice as powerful as the joy of gain. When you tell someone they're about to lose an opportunity, you trigger their survival instinct. The word response is to grab the item before it's gone, bypassing the logical, do I actually need this? Phase 3. The authority bias, the uniform effect. From a young age, we are trained to obey authority. We look for symbols, titles, clothing, expensive cars, or certifications to tell us who is in charge. When we perceive someone as an authority, we stop thinking critically and start following instructions. In a famous and disturbing study by Stanley Milgram, ordinary people were willing to deliver what they thought were lethal electric shocks to strangers simply because a man in a white lab coat told them. The experiment requires that you continue to influence others. You must dress your ideas in authority. This doesn't mean being arrogant. It means using data, citing experts, and presenting yourself with the status signals we discussed in Chapter 3. If you don't establish your authority early, you will spend the rest of the interaction fighting an uphill battle for respect. 4. Commitment and consistency. The foot in human beings have a near obsessive desire to be and to appear consistent with what we have already done or said. Once we take a stand or make a small commitment, we feel a massive internal and external pressure to follow through. This is why the small yes is so important. If you want someone to agree to a $10,000 project, start by getting them to agree to a 10-minute phone call. Once they have invested 10 minutes, their brain labels them as someone who is interested in this project. To back out later would be inconsistent, and as we learned in Chapter 2, the brain hates the itch of cognitive dissonance. 5. Social proof. The herd instinct. When we are uncertain, we look to others to see how to behave. If everyone else is doing it, it must be the right thing to do. This is why bestseller lists and join 50,000 other subscribers work so well. The master of influence never asks someone to be the first to try something. They show them a crowd of people who have already done it. We are social animals, and the worst response is to follow the herd to stay safe within the tribe. 6. Liking the friendship lever. We are much more likely to say yes to people we like. But what makes us like someone? The research is clear. Physical attractiveness, the halo effect. We assume good-looking people are also smart and kind. Similarity, the rapport we built in Chapter 5. Compliments, genuine praise triggers a liking response even when we know the person has something to gain. Cooperation, working toward a common goal. The contrast principle, the anchor effect. This is a meta shortcut that affects how we perceive all the others. The brain does not perceive value in a vacuum. It perceives it through comparison. If you lift a 10 pounds weight and then lift a 20 pounds weight, the second one feels heavy. But if you lift a 50 pounds weight first and then the 20 pounds weight, the 20 pounds one feels light. The anchor, the first number, sets the frame. In negotiation, if you present a premium option first, that is very expensive. Your standard option suddenly looks like a bargain. The price of the standard option didn't change, but the perception of it did. You influenced the word response by manipulating the contrast. Psychological reflection, the ethics of the shortcut. These shortcuts are like the source code of human behavior. Using them is like having the administrative password to someone's decision-making process. Because they work on a subconscious level, the person being influenced often doesn't even realize it's happening. They feel like they made the decision themselves. This is where your ethical compass must come in. If you use these shortcuts to trick people into doing things that are bad for them, you are a manipulator. But if you use them to help a client overcome their fear of change, to buy a product that will genuinely help them, you are a leader. The shortcuts are not good or evil. They are simply how the human brain functions. The master of behavior understands that these levers are always present. You can either ignore them and hope for the best, or you can learn to pull them with intention and integrity. Key takeaway: the brain uses heuristics or shortcuts to navigate a complex world. By understanding triggers like reciprocity, scarcity, and authority, you can bypass logical resistance and trigger automatic yes responses. But what happens when these shortcuts fail? What happens when you hit a wall of pure, irrational resistance? To handle that, we have to look into the darkest corners of the human mind, the shadow self and defense mechanisms. Chapter 7. The shadow self, understanding defense mechanisms. We have all been there. You present a perfectly logical argument. You offer a solution that is clearly beneficial. And you do it with rapport and kindness, yet the other person shuts down. They become angry. They change the subject, or they stonewall you with a cold, blank stare. In these moments, you aren't talking to their human brain, or even their mammalian brain. You are bumping up against their shadow. The concept of the shadow, popularized by Carl Jung, represents the parts of our personality that we have rejected, hidden, or deemed unacceptable. When an interaction touches a person's shadow, their insecurities, their past failures, or their deepest fears, they stop acting rationally and start acting defensively. To influence at a master level, you must learn to navigate these psychological minefields without setting them off. The ego's bodyguards. Why we resist. The ego is the chief executive of our internal narrative. Its primary job is to maintain a consistent, positive image of ourselves. If information comes in that suggests we are wrong, weak, or unimportant, the ego perceives this as an existential threat. It then deploys a fleet of defense mechanisms to neutralize the threat. Most people respond to defense mechanisms by pushing harder. They think, if I just explain it one more time, they'll see. But pushing against a defense mechanism is like pushing against a spring. The harder you press, the harder it pushes back. The master of behavior does not push, they dissolve. 1. Projection, the mirror defense. Projection is one of the most common ways we handle our own flaws. When someone has a trait they dislike in themselves, perhaps they are secretly quite selfish, their brain projects that trait onto others. They will constantly accuse you of being selfish. The influence strategy: do not take the bait. If you defend yourself, "I'm not selfish," you validate their projection and enter a conflict. Instead, use externalization. Frame the issue as a neutral, third-party problem. It seems like there's a concern about how resources are being shared. Let's look at the data together. You move the focus from you versus me to us versus the data to rationalization, the lying to ourselves defense. We are not rational animals. We are rationalizing animals. When we make a bad decision or fail at a task, we invent logical reasons to explain why it wasn't our fault. I didn't get the promotion because the boss likes Yasmin, not because I missed my targets. The influence strategy: save the face. Never corner someone into admitting they were wrong. If you force an admission of failure, you create an enemy for life. Instead, provide them with a golden bridge to retreat across. Give them a face-saving excuse. I know the market conditions were incredibly tough last quarter, which made hitting those targets nearly impossible. Given that, how can we pivot for next month? You've given them a way to change their behavior without damaging their ego. 3. Reaction formation, the overcorrection. Sometimes, when a person feels an unacceptable impulse, they act out the extreme opposite. A person who feels deeply insecure might act with extreme arrogance. A person who is terrified of change might become the most vocal advocate for tradition. The influence strategy: address the underlying fear, not the outward behavior. The arrogance is just a mask for "I don't feel good enough." If you provide genuine, low-pressure validation for their skills, the need for the arrogant mask slowly disappears. The shadow in communication: identifying hot buttons. Everyone has hot buttons, specific topics, or words that trigger an immediate defensive response. These are usually tied to childhood wounds or past professional traumas. One person might be triggered by being micromanaged, while another is triggered by not being consulted. That master of influence is a pattern recognizer. When you see a disproportionate emotional reaction to a small comment, you have found a hot button. The discovery question: ask yourself, what is the threat they are perceiving right now? Asterisk: are they afraid of looking stupid? Are they afraid of losing control? Are they afraid of being replaced? Once you identify the fear, you can label it. In hostage negotiation, this is called effective labeling. You say, "It seems like you feel that this new software might make your current expertise less relevant." Paradoxically, when you name the shadow fear, it loses its power. The other person feels understood, and the amygdala hijack begins to subside. The power of I versus you. The fastest way to trigger a defense mechanism is to use the word you. You didn't finish the report. You are being difficult. You need to listen. To the brain, you sounds like a finger pointing. It is an accusation. To bypass the shadow, switch to I messages or the situation messages. I'm struggling to move forward without the data from that report. I feel like we're hitting a bit of a roadblock in our communication. It seems like the current plan is causing some friction. By removing the you remove the target. The other person's ego can stay off duty, allowing their human brain to stay engaged in the conversation. The shadow of the influencer. We must also look at our own shadows. Why do we want to influence this person? Is it because we truly believe in the solution? Or is it because we have a need for significance? Chapter 4. That requires us to win every argument. If you approach influence with a hidden agenda of proving your own superiority, the other person's subconscious will pick up on it instantly. They will smell the contempt or the arrogance, and their defense mechanisms will rise up to meet yours. This is how power struggles are born. Mastery requires radical self-honesty. You must be willing to look at your own shadow and ask, am I trying to help, or am I trying to be right? When you let go of the need to be the one who knows everything, you paradoxically become much more influential. Psychological reflection, the compassion of the shadow. Understanding defense mechanisms changes your emotional temperature. Instead of getting angry when someone is stubborn or rude, you start to feel a sense of clinical compassion. You realize that their behavior is just a shield. Think of a wounded animal. A wounded dog will growl and snap at the hand that is trying to help it. It's not being bad. It's in pain and it's terrified. Human beings are no different. When someone snaps at you, they are usually bleeding psychologically. The master of behavior is the person who can look past a growl and see the wound. When you stop reacting to the shield and start speaking to the person behind it, you gain a level of influence that feels like magic to those who don't understand the shadow. Key takeaway: all resistance is a form of self-protection. To influence a defensive person, stop attacking their shield and start lowering their threat level through validation, face-saving, and empathy. Once we have learned to navigate the shadow and lower the defenses, we can begin to direct the flow of the conversation. We do this by controlling the most powerful tool in the human mind, the frame. Chapter 8. The Power of Framing, Changing the Lens. In the world of professional photography, a frame determines what the viewer sees and, more importantly, what they don't see. By shifting the camera just a few inches, a photographer can make a crowded city street look like a lonely alleyway or a small garden look like a sprawling forest. The human mind works exactly the same way. We do not process information in a vacuum. We process it within a frame of reference. The frame is the context that gives raw data its meaning. To master the psychology of behavior, you must realize that the person who sets the frame controls the conversation. Influence is often less about changing the facts and more about changing the meaning of those facts. By shifting the lens, the meaning is the frame. Imagine I offer you a 75% lean ground beef burger. You'll likely think it sounds healthy and high quality. Now, imagine I offer you a burger that is 25% fat. Suddenly, it sounds greasy and unappealing. The physical object, the burger, hasn't changed. The chemical composition is identical. But the frame has shifted from lean to fat. This is the framing effect. Our brains are incredibly sensitive to how information is presented. We are cognitive misers. We take the easiest path to meaning, and the frame provides that path. Types of frames. Strategic shifting. In any interaction, there are several frames you can use to guide the other person's perception. The master doesn't stick to one. They pivot based on the psychological need. 1. The investment versus cost frame. If you tell a client a project will cost $5,000, their brain immediately categorizes it as a loss. And remember, Chapter 6, the brain hates loss. However, if you frame it as a $5,000 investment that will generate $20,000 in efficiency, the brain categorizes it as a gain. You haven't changed the price. You've changed the mental bucket the money sits in. 2. The challenge versus opportunity frame. When a team hits a setback, the natural frame is failure. This triggers the shadow defenses, Chapter 7, and the lizard brain stress response. By reframing the setback as a stress test or a data-gathering mission, you lower the threat level. You turn a stop sign into a compass. 3. The choice frame. Humans have a deep-seated need for autonomy. If you give someone a single option, they often feel trapped and will resist just to prove they have free will. By offering a choice of two, both of which lead to your desired outcome, you frame the interaction around which way they will proceed, rather than if they will proceed. Persuasion. Setting the frame before the start. The most effective framing happens before you even present your core idea. This is what psychological researcher Robert Cialdini calls persuasion. You prime the environment to make the person more receptive to the frame you are about to set. If you want someone to be adventurous and try a new product, you might start the conversation by asking them about a time they took a risk that paid off. By bringing that memory into their conscious penthouse, you have set an adventurous frame. When you then present your new idea, it fits the current mental state you've created. The why frame, connecting to purpose. Most people communicate using the what frame, what they do, or the how frame, how they do it. But as Simon Sinek famously pointed out, the most influential leaders start with why. The why frame bypasses the analytical, skeptical part of the brain and speaks directly to the emotional center. When you frame a task around its purpose, how it helps people, how it changes the future, or how it aligns with the person's values. You are no longer asking for work. You are asking for contribution, one of the 6 core needs from Chapter 4. Reframing resistance. The judo of the mind. When someone gives you an objection, most people treat it as a wall and try to knock it down. The master treats it like energy and uses psychological judo to redirect it. If a client says, "Your service is too expensive," they have set a price frame. If you argue that it's actually cheap, you stay in their frame and you lose. Instead, reframe the objection. "I'm glad you brought that up. Because our price is higher, it allows us to provide a level of security and specialized support that cheaper firms simply can't afford. In your industry, is the cost of failure higher or lower than our fee?" You have moved the frame from price to risk management. You aren't fighting their objection. You are stepping out of the way and letting their own logic pull them into a new frame. The power of yet and small wins. Language is the building block of the frame. 2 of the most powerful words in the psychology of behavior are yet and we. Yet. If a child says, "I can't do math," they've set a fixed frame of failure. If you add the word yet, "You can't do math yet," you have reframed the situation into a growth frame. You've signaled that the current state is temporary. Small wins. When facing a massive project, the brain often feels overwhelmed. The lizard brain wants to run away. By framing the project as a series of small, easy wins, you trigger the dopamine loop. Chapter 1. Each small win makes the next step feel easier. The status frame. In every social interaction, there is an invisible negotiation of who is higher status. If you approach someone as a supplicant begging for a favor, you have set a low status frame. People instinctively resist or ignore low status signals. The master uses the peer frame. You approach even the most powerful people with the assumption that your time and expertise are just as valuable as theirs. You frame the interaction as a value exchange between equals. This doesn't mean being disrespectful. It means being unneedy. Neediness is a frame that smells like extinction to our ancient brains. Psychological reflection. Living inside the frame. We must realize that we are also living inside frames set by others, the media, our upbringing, our bosses. Mastery of behavior isn't just about framing the world for others. It's about reframing your own life. When you hit a hardship, do you frame it as the universe is against me, or this is the training I need for the next level? The facts of the hardship are the same, but the person who emerges from the training frame is much more powerful than the person who suffers in the victim frame. Influence is the art of inviting someone into a better, more productive frame of reality. It's about helping them see a version of the world where success is possible, cooperation is rewarding, and change is an adventure rather than a threat. Key takeaway: facts do not have inherent meaning. Meaning is created by the frame you place around them. To influence a decision, stop arguing about the facts and start defining the context. Chapter 9. Social Dynamics. The invisible game of status. Even if you are the most logical person in the room, you are still a social primate. From the boardroom to the dinner table, every human interaction is layered with an invisible, constant negotiation of social standing. We like to think we have evolved past the pecking orders of our ancestors, but the psychology of social dynamics proves otherwise. To master human behavior, you must understand that people do not just respond to what is being said. They respond to the status of the person saying it. If you ignore the social game, your influence will be capped. You will be the person with the best ideas that no one listens to. But if you learn to navigate these hierarchies with grace and awareness, you can move through social spaces like a master key, opening doors that remain locked to others. The duality of status, internal versus external. Status is often misunderstood as being a jerk or showing off. In reality, status in social dynamics is about value. Our brains are constantly calculating. Does this person have high value to the tribe? Should I follow them, or should they follow me? There are 2 types of status signals. External status. Your job title, your bank account, your clothes, and your connections. These are shortcuts, Chapter 6, that give you a temporary boost, but they are fragile. Internal status. This is your social value, your level of comfort in your own skin. your lack of neediness, and your ability to remain calm under pressure. This is much more powerful because it cannot be taken away. The status game, high status versus low status signals. The book breaks down how we communicate status through subtle behaviors. Most people play the low status game without even realizing it. They do this through supplication. Low status signals, speaking too fast, fidgeting, over-explaining your actions, seeking constant micro-approvals, for example, ending every sentence with right. Or does that make sense? And making yourself physically small. High status signals, slow, deliberate movements, economical speech using fewer words to say more, comfortable eye contact, and the ability to be still. High status people don't feel the need to fill every silence. They understand that silence is a tool of power. In terms of influence, if you approach a high status person with low status signals, they will subconsciously categorize you as irrelevant or a subordinate. They won't take your advice. Because their limbic system, Chapter 1, tells them that following someone of lower status is a risk to their own standing. The principle of social value and the scarcity of attention. In any social group, the person with the highest status is usually the person who is the least needy for the group's approval. This is the law of least effort. The person who is trying the hardest to be liked, the people pleaser, paradoxically, has the lowest social value. Why? Because their attention and approval are cheap. They give it away to everyone. The master of behavior understands that attention is a currency. When you are selective with your praise and your presence, that praise becomes a reward chapter for that people will work to earn. This isn't about being cold. It's about being high value. You are warm and empathetic, but you are not needy. You are willing to walk away from a deal or a conversation if it doesn't align with your values. This power of the walk away is the ultimate high status signal. Groupthink and the bystander effect. Social dynamics also dictate how groups behave differently than individuals. When people are in a group, their human brain penthouse often defers to the tribal brain. This leads to groupthink, where the desire for harmony and fitting in outweighs the desire for a good decision. If you want to influence a group, you cannot just address the group as a whole. You must identify the key node, the person the others look to for cues. This is often not the person with the highest official title, but the person with the most social capital. If you win over the key node, the rest of the tribe will follow due to social proof, Chapter 6. Navigating hierarchies with strategic support. There is a time to be high status and a time to play the fool. Robert Greene, in the 48 Laws of Power, notes that you should never outshine the master. If you are trying to influence someone who is highly insecure about their status, the shadow from Chapter 7. Behaving as a high-status peer might trigger their defense mechanisms. The master uses strategic subservience. You allow the other person to feel like they are the one in charge. You ask for their advice instead of giving them suggestions. You frame your ideas as if they were an extension of their brilliant vision. By lowering your own status temporarily, you bypass their ego guards and plant the seeds of your influence where they can actually grow. The Ben Franklin effect in social groups. One of the most counterintuitive secrets of social dynamics is that we don't like people because they do things for us. We like people because we do things for them. If you want to build status and rapport in a new group, don't try to impress them by doing favors. Instead, ask for a small, easy-to-grant favor. Could you show me how you did that report? Or could I get your opinion on this? When someone does you a favor, their brain has to justify it. I'm helping this person, so they must be worth helping. I must like them. This creates a consistency loop, Chapter 6, that bonds them to you. Psychological reflection, the responsibility of the center. Status is not a trophy to be won. It is a responsibility to be managed. The social game exists because humans need leadership, clarity, and safety. When you occupy a high-status position, whether through your expertise, your confidence, or your empathy, the people around you will look to you to set the tone. If you are anxious, the group will be anxious. If you are calm and certain, the group will feel safe. Mastery of social dynamics is about becoming the emotional thermostat of the room. You don't just react to the social energy. You dictate it. You use your status not to look down on others, but to lift the ceiling, A true master uses their social capital to make everyone in the room feel more significant, more certain, and more connected. When you use your power to empower others, your influence becomes permanent. Key takeaway: every interaction is a status negotiation. To influence others, you must project high social value by being needy, mastering your nonverbal signals, and understanding the tribal rules of the game. We have now explored the biological, psychological, and social levers of human behavior. But with great power comes a great danger. How do we ensure that these tools are used for good and not for manipulation? This brings us to our final chapter, the ethical compass. Chapter 10, the ethical compass. Mastery without manipulation. We have reached the deepest part of the forest. We have unlocked the source code of the human mind, from the ancient electrical pulses of the lizard brain to the sophisticated social games of the modern tribe. You now hold the keys to the kingdom, the ability to bypass resistance, trigger automatic yes responses, and reshape how people perceive reality itself. But here, we must pause. There is a thin, razor-sharp line between influence and manipulation. Influence is the act of moving people toward a vision that benefits everyone. Manipulation is the act of using psychological shortcuts to trick people into doing things that serve only you. One builds a legacy, the other builds a prison. To truly master the psychology of human behavior, you must develop an ethical compass that is as strong as your psychological toolkit. The dark triad, the warning signs of the shadow. Psychology identifies 3 traits that, when combined, create the dark triad: narcissism, entitlement, and superiority; Machiavellianism, manipulation and exploitation; and psychopathy, lack of empathy and remorse. People with these traits use the techniques we've discussed: mirroring, framing, and scarcity, not to connect, but to consume. They view other human beings as chess pieces rather than partners. While these tactics can lead to short-term wins, they are psychologically unsustainable. Because humans are pattern recognizers. Chapter 3. The tribe eventually senses the coldness behind the mask. Once trust is broken at a biological level, it is almost impossible to repair. The manipulator ends up in the most dangerous social position of all: exclusion. The enlightened self-interest model. The master of behavior operates on a different model: enlightened self-interest. This is the understanding that the best way to get what you want is to help enough other people get what they want. Influence is a value exchange. If you use the reciprocity lever, Chapter 6, to give someone a gift just to trap them into a bad deal, you are a manipulator. But if you use that same lever to provide genuine value, first building trust and lowering their anxiety so that you can both reach a deal that solves their problems, you are a leader. The lever is the same. The intent is what determines the outcome. The 3 tests of ethical influence. Before you apply these psychological principles, put your intent through these 3 filters. The transparency test. If the other person knew exactly which psychological shortcut you were using, would they feel offended, or would they still agree? If you're using social proof to show them that others have succeeded, they'd likely thank you for the clarity. If you're using false scarcity to rush them into a mistake, they'd feel betrayed. The long-term test. Will this interaction strengthen or weaken the relationship 6 months from now? Manipulation is a one-night stand. Influence is a marriage. The benefit test. Is the target of your influence better off after this interaction than they were before? True mastery is about leaving people better than you found them. Empathy as a strategic guardrail. In Chapter 5, we discussed active empathetic listening as a tool for rapport. But empathy is also your greatest ethical safeguard. When you truly step into someone else's architecture of belief, Chapter 2, it becomes very difficult to harm them. Manipulation requires objectification, treating the other person as an object to be moved. Empathy humanizes them. When you can feel their certainty and significance needs as if they were your own, your influence naturally shifts toward cooperation. The responsibility of the high-status leader. In Chapter 9, we learned that the person with the most stable emotional state and the biased social value dictates the vibe of the room. This power comes with a heavy burden. If you are a master of behavior, people will subconsciously look to you for permission. They will mirror your ethics. If you are shortcutting the truth, they will shortcut the truth. If you are using your power to diminish others to make yourself feel significant, you create a toxic culture that will eventually collapse. A true master uses their status to create a psychologically safe environment. They use their understanding of the shadow chapter 7 to protect others from their own insecurities. They use their framing chapter 8 to give people hope and direction. This is servant leadership powered by psychological mastery. The trap of the expert's ego. There is a final danger, the belief that because you understand human behavior, you are above it. This is a shadow trap, chapter 7. No matter how many books you read, you still have a lizard brain. You still have cognitive biases. You are still subject to the same click-word responses as everyone else. The most ethical influencers are the most humble. They realize that they are work in progress, influencing other works in progress. They use their knowledge to be more patient, more forgiving, and more aware of their own flaws. They don't use psychology to win life. They use it to understand life. Psychological reflection, the soul of influence. We began this journey by looking at the invisible strings that move us. It's easy to look at the world as a giant machine of cause and effect, but at the center of all these biological and psychological laws is a human soul seeking connection, meaning, and growth. Psychology is the study of the how, but ethics is the study of the why. Without a why, your how is just noise. When you align your mastery of human behavior with a deep, unwavering commitment to the well-being of others, you become something much more than a persuader. You become a catalyst. You become the person who helps others unlock their own penthouse, quiet their own lizard brain, and map a reality that is filled with possibility. Key takeaway: knowledge of psychology is power, and power is a neutral tool. True mastery is the marriage of psychological insight with ethical intent. Influence is not something you do to someone. It is a journey you take with them. Conclusion: the conscious architect. We have traveled a long road together, from the deep, ancient basements of our biological lizard brain to the high-rise penthouse of our conscious logic. We have looked behind the curtain of human behavior and seen that what we often call personality or free will is frequently just a collection of survival instincts, cognitive shortcuts, and social scripts. But understanding these patterns doesn't make life less meaningful. It makes it more manageable. By learning to master the psychology of human behavior, you have essentially been handed the manual for a machine. You've been operating by guesswork for years. You are no longer just a passenger in the vehicle of your own subconscious. You are now the architect of your interactions. The deeper message: from reaction to response. The ultimate lesson of this book is the move from reaction to response. Most people live in a state of constant reaction. A stranger is rude, and they react with anger. A boss is critical, and they react with defensiveness. A goal feels far away, and they react with procrastination. Mastery is the gap you create between a stimulus and your reaction. In that gap lies your freedom. Because you now understand the amygdala hijack, you can feel the heat of anger rising and choose to breathe rather than snap. Because you understand framing, you can look at a failure and choose to see a lesson. Because you understand rapport, you can look at a difficult person and choose to see a threatened ego that needs validation. Practical principles for the real world. As you step back into your daily life, into your meetings, your family dinners, and your quiet moments of self-reflection, carry these 5 principles with you. Lower the threat level first. You cannot influence a brain that feels unsafe. Whether you are giving feedback or asking for a raise, your first job is to soothe the other person's lizard brain through calm tonality and validation. Give psychological air. Stop waiting for your turn to speak. Listen until the other person feels truly heard. When you give people the air of empathy, they will naturally give you the space for your ideas. Find the shared why. Never stand across the table from someone. Always try to stand on the same side. Align your request with one of their 6 core needs: certainty, variety, significance, connection, growth, or contribution. Master the frame. He who defines the meaning of the situation defines the outcome. Don't argue about facts. Argue about the lens through which those facts are viewed. Lead with abundance, not neediness. The person with the most stable emotional state always wins. Cultivate an internal okayness that doesn't depend on the yes of others. Paradoxically, the less you need the yes, the easier it becomes to get. A memorable reflection. The world is not made of objects. It is made of relationships. And relationships are governed by the invisible laws of psychology. As you walk away from this journey, remember that the most important person you will ever influence is the one staring back at you in the mirror. All the tools we've discussed, framing your failures, understanding your own shadow, and managing your biological triggers apply to you first. When you master yourself, you become a magnet rather than a hammer. You don't have to force the world to change. The world begins to change because of the person you have become. So, I leave you with one final question. Now that you know how the strings are pulled, what kind of story are you going to write with your own life?